Ladies and gentlemen, my name's Paul, and in this Ryzen video we're going to be discussing the Xbox Scorpio. So Project Scorpio is of course the upcoming upgraded version of the Xbox One. Now, details are still a bit sketchy, but these latest leaks which come from Eurogamer, specifically from a white paper which was given to the website, do tell us quite a bit more now than what we knew 24 hours ago. Specifically, we know, for example, that the eSRAM from both the Xbox One and the Xbox One S are now gone. Now, the primary reason behind this, of course, would be the additional memory bandwidth afforded to the Scorpio. The white paper, which is entitled Reaching 4K and GPU Scaling Across Multiple Xbox One Devices, says, and I quote, eSRAM remains essential to achieving high performance on both the Xbox One and the Xbox One S. However, Project Scorpio and the PC are not provided with eSRAM because developers are not allowed to use a ship Project Scorpio only SKU. Optimizing for eSRAM remains critical to performance on Microsoft platforms. So in other words, what they're saying here, of course, is that you can't just be like, okay, well, I'm going to release a Project Scorpio only game. Therefore, developers still need to account for eSRAM because they need to target the lower hardware, in other words, the Xbox One, the vanilla system. But they do tell us that eSRAM is categorically, emphatically ruled out for the upgraded hardware. Microsoft also points out that the strategies which favour eSRAM are also good for the more powerful systems, especially when it comes to PCs with more limited VRAM, and they believe it makes 4K easier and boosts visual quality settings. In other words, they're saying that if you've got a lower specification machine, let's just for example say an RX 460, with the strategies you employ with eSRAM on the potential 460, you'll be able to get better quality settings than if the developers didn't go for those levels of optimization. There are a precious few other details. Now, obviously the fact that 6 teraflops of GPU performance isn't new. We've known this for some time, but they do emphatically state that the compute power is about 4.5 times the capability of the original Xbox One, which mathematically makes a great deal of sense. And also we're seeing the inclusion of 4 times the amount of level 2 cache. This is also rather important when it comes to not just saving memory bandwidth, but also low latency access. So in other words, more frequently accessed tasks can be stored in level 2 rather than the GPU needing to farm out more frequently to main system memory. It's also been confirmed that the GPU will have a more updated architecture compared to the original system, because level 2 cache, at least according to any GPUs we know now, means that we're going to see at least Polaris. Now, I personally believe we're probably going to see either a Polaris/Vega hybrid, or more likely, perhaps more Vega orientated. Mark Cerny, for example, with the PS4 Pro, confirmed on stage that there are several technologies which come from beyond Polaris, and the GPU which is beyond Polaris is Vega. Now, considering we're not going to be seeing Scorpio until, let's say, holiday 2017, which is the proposed date by Microsoft themselves, that means it theoretically makes no sense for them to have older GPU technology. Concerning the CPU side of things, however, things are a little more grim. Now, this is not a confirmation, but it sounds a bit suspect. We acknowledge developers may not wish to spend all the additional GPU resources of Project Scorpio on resolution, and this is not mandated. This is what the paper says. To make the best games possible, developers will inevitably spend GPU resources on other quality improvements, such as higher fidelity shadows and reflections, texture filtering, and lower draw distances. Another option developers might consider is frame rate upscaling. This is running graphics at 60 Hz, but the CPU at 30 Hz in interpolating the animation. So this basically means that there's a good probability that we're still going to be some kind of custom Jaguar processor. Now, that is not confirmed by any stretch of the imagination, and before anyone gets really disappointed with this revelation, to be fair to Microsoft, they've never actually gone ahead and said, hey, there's a Ryzen CPU in here. It's just I think for the reason most people assumed it would be is because there was a 6 T-flop GPU, so we made the assumption, a logical assumption, that they would perhaps go to an updated CPU architecture. Now, obviously we don't know the clock speed, because for example, the PS4 Pro had a significant CPU upclock compared to the original PS4, so it's possible that they're going to have the same or similar frequencies to the PS4 Pro, or they might even try to squeeze a little bit higher out of the Xbox Scorpio. The other thing to note is that Microsoft, in this particular white paper, have also said that they are recommending sparse rendering. Now, you might be aware of that because PS4 Pro games have used this in the past, and it's called checkerboard rendering. Now, titles, for example, like Rainbow Six Siege have used it quite infamously. And honestly, some people dislike it, some people love it. It does make definitely large improvements over the graphical fidelity of, like, say, native 1080p, but others will argue that it's not true 4K. We've talked a hell of a lot about Vega previously, and it's not inconceivable for a Vega GPU with not a great deal of CUs to hit 6 T-flops. We've been through the math multiple times over, but anything between, let's say, the low 40 compute units up to, let's say, 48. That means that you can have a clock speed of around the low 1 gigahertz mark, let's say about 1.15 to let's say high 900s, can easily hit those clocks. Now, Vega has stated in its marketing literature that they are aiming for higher clock speeds. And I did try to press AMD for this information, but obviously they're not too happy to shed too much light on that. What we do know then, right now, is that there is no eSRAM, the level 2 cache has been improved. If it is using a more updated GPU, for example Polaris or Vega, there are inherently different optimizations. For example, Vega uses tile-based rasterizers, so theoretically this could lead to definite performance advantages when it comes to checkerboard rendering anyway. Plus as well, Vega has numerous other improvements that we've discussed with the PS4 Pro video. For example, improvements to compute, the fact that it can handle 16-bit floating operations times 2 per clock, which is definitely going to be an advantage for compute-based scenarios. Aside from all of that, we know it's got 320 gigabytes per second of memory bandwidth, 8 CPU cores. Obviously, we don't know what that architecture is. And Phil Spencer himself has gone on record and has said that he has had a great day, Scorpio update with the team, played my first games on an early Scorpio unit, gameplay great, console looked right, proud of the team. Now, early, of course, doesn't really tell us the state of the hardware. For example, early could be that, well, you've got wires hanging out the back, or early could be that the general PCB, the actual architecture is right, but maybe they've got a few traces missing and they've had to do a few shorts here and there, but overall the chips are okay. It could be, however, that maybe they don't have final clock speeds. It could be there's a lot of debuggers going on. We just don't know. But it does give a good indication that Microsoft are at least semi on track with the Scorpio. It's going to be interesting how Microsoft and Sony compete with their PS4 Pro and the Scorpio respectively. I'm not quite sure how the market's going to take it. Now, I probably will put out another video on this, examining this more in depth. There is an increasing argument online, simply because of the date that Scorpio is going to be released, that there should have been like a cutoff with the Scorpio. So they should maybe have released it in, like, let's say, early 2018, and rather than calling it an upgraded Xbox One, they should have almost considered it a new console. However, I can definitely see the appeal of Microsoft not doing that, because if they were to do that, essentially they're saying that the Xbox One is at an end. It's EOL, it's end of life. And I think most folks would agree that now Microsoft have gotten a reasonable install base of the Xbox One. Yes, it's not selling quite as well as the PS4, but, you know, that is neither here nor there, really. The installation base of the Xbox One is pretty profound. So essentially they would be saying, to developers, hey, if you want, you could not produce a game which would target the lower hardware. And that also might rub people the wrong way, including in development circles, because then they would say, well, if I were to do that, that basically means I'm cutting off a large percentage of my install base, so they would possibly target the lower specification anyway, in other words, Xbox One Plus. So it just kind of makes things a bit weird. Anyway, hopefully you've enjoyed the video. I'll see you soon. Take care of yourselves. Bye for now.